The first thing Elias noticed was the silence. Not the comforting kind, not the absence of noise, but a deliberate quiet, engineered and enforced. The command deck of the Celestine Accord floated in orbit above a dead ice moon, its vast observation chamber illuminated by cold blue light and slow-moving holographic constellations. Hundreds of systems were monitored here. Entire wars paused or resumed based on decisions made within these walls. Yet when she entered, even the hum of machinery seemed to lower itself out of respect. Elias stood among a small group of human delegates, his role unofficial, undefined, and intentionally vague. He wasn't a diplomat. He wasn't military. He was a systems architect brought in as a technical observer, which everyone knew was a polite way of saying we don't fully understand why you're here, but someone insisted. That someone had been the Queen herself, Queen Elthira of the Velarith Dominion. She stood at the center of the chamber now, framed by floating glyphs and crystalline data columns, her presence commanding without effort. Pale, luminous skin reflected the ambient light like polished marble. Her long, platinum hair flowed down her back, partially braided with thin metallic threads that caught the blue glow. A crown of intricate silver and sapphire rested lightly upon her head, not heavy with jewels, but precise, elegant, unmistakably designed rather than ornamental. Her eyes were what held him. Not because they were blue, many alien species had blue eyes, but because they were focused. Not drifting, not cold, not detached. They measured, calculated, observed him the way a scientist observes an anomaly that refuses to fit established equations. Elias felt it before he understood it. He was being evaluated. "Begin," Elthira said. Her voice was calm, melodic, and perfectly translated into human auditory range by the station's linguistic field. But the technology could not soften the weight behind it. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. A holographic projection expanded between the delegates, displaying contested systems along the Velarith human border. Red markers pulsed faintly, denoting regions of previous conflict. Blue lines indicated fragile ceasefire boundaries. 3 cycles, Elthira continued. 3 cycles since hostilities were suspended. And yet your fleets remain armed. Your listening posts remain active. Your people speak of peace while preparing for war. A human diplomat cleared his throat. Your Majesty, the same could be said of the Dominion. Her gaze did not shift. That is because it is true. The room stiffened. Elias watched carefully not just her words but the timing between them, the subtle pauses, the way she allowed discomfort to bloom before moving on. This wasn't anger. This was pressure applied with surgical precision. "And yet," she said, finally turning her eyes toward Elias, "you are here." Every head in the chamber followed her gaze. Elias felt the sudden, uncomfortable heat of attention. "I am your Majesty." "You are not listed as a negotiator," Elthira said, "nor as military command, nor as scientific envoy. Your presence is irregular." He nodded once. "So I've been told." A few delegates shifted uncomfortably. Elthira studied him in silence. Close up, the details were even more striking. The faint luminescent pattern along her temples, the way her elongated ears angled slightly forward, signaling heightened attention. He had read about Velarith physiology, about their heightened sensory perception, about their biological sensitivities. He had not read anything about how it felt to be looked at like this. "You designed the harmonic stabilizers used in the outer corridor stations," she said. "Yes. You rewrote the adaptive shielding algorithms after the Seraph Rift incident." "Yes. And you proposed an alternative to forced separation fields during cross-species contact." Elias hesitated. "That proposal was never approved," he said carefully. "No," Elthira replied. "It was classified." Her eyes narrowed, not in threat, but in curiosity. "You suggested that biological incompatibility should be treated as an engineering problem rather than a permanent barrier." The chamber was very quiet now. Elias met her gaze. "I did. Do you still believe that?" she asked. This was not a rhetorical question. Every instinct told him this was dangerous ground. The Velarith were known for their pheromonal biochemistry, beautiful, complex, and lethal to humans under specific conditions. Entire treaties were built around distance, around separation, around the unspoken truth that closeness was fatal. Yes, Elias said, I do. Elthira tilted her head slightly, a Velarith gesture of consideration. Even knowing, she said, that my species cannot engage in close physical proximity with yours without risking your death. Yes, a murmur rippled through the human delegation. Elthira stepped closer. Not into his space, protocol fields still shimmered faintly between them, but close enough that the difference felt deliberate. Why? She asked quietly. Elias didn't answer immediately. Because, he said at last, if peace only works at a distance, then it isn't peace. It's just a ceasefire with better manners. Something changed, not visibly, not dramatically, but Elias felt it. Interest sharpened into focus. Elthira held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly she smiled. It wasn't warm, it wasn't cruel, it was intentional. Then you and I, she said, will speak privately. The words landed like a verdict. Your Majesty, a diplomat began. This is not a request, Elthira said calmly. It is an experiment. Her eyes returned to Elias. And you, she added, are now part of it. As the chamber doors sealed, the private chamber was smaller than Elias expected. Not cramped. Nothing aboard the Celestine Accord was, but intentionally intimate. Curved crystalline walls refracted soft blue light into shifting patterns, and the air itself felt heavier, denser, subtly regulated. A faint shimmer marked the active separation field, invisible unless you knew what to look for. Elthira stood on the far side of it. Up close, the effect was unsettling. Not fear. Elias had faced reactor breaches and collapsing stations, but the awareness that every system in this room existed because she was dangerous to him in ways no weapon could replicate. The Velarith pheromonal spectrum was legendary, elegant, complex, lethal to humans when concentration and emotion aligned, and she knew it. You're calmer than expected, Elthira observed. Elias exhaled slowly. I've learned that panic doesn't improve survivability. A corner of her mouth curved upward. A human trait I find statistically inconsistent. He glanced at the faintly glowing field between them. This is stronger than standard diplomatic separation. Yes, she replied without hesitation. I requested it. That earned a raised eyebrow, concerned for my safety. For yours, she corrected, and mine. That surprised him. You're aware of the human reaction thresholds, Elias said. But Velarith don't usually acknowledge risk to themselves. Her eyes sharpened. You assume my concern is physical. She stepped closer to the barrier. The light responded, intensifying briefly. When a Velarith sovereign initiates unsanctioned proximity with another species, she continued, it is interpreted as intent. Intent creates expectations. Expectations create consequences. Elias nodded slowly. Political. And personal, she added. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable but charged. You called this an experiment, Elias said. That implies variables. Yes. And hypotheses. Yes. And risk. Her gaze held his. Absolutely. She lifted her hand, not touching the barrier, but close enough that Elias felt the instinctive urge to step back, despite knowing the field was stable. My people believe biological incompatibility is destiny, Elthira said. That closeness between us and humans is forbidden by nature itself. And you disagree, Elias said. I believe nature describes constraints, she replied, not conclusions. That was unexpectedly human. Then why hasn't anyone tried to solve it? He asked, not seriously. Her expression shifted, something colder passing behind the beauty. Because attempts require proximity, she said quietly. And proximity has consequences. Humans die. Velarith are blamed. Fear becomes policy. She lowered her hand. I have ruled for 6 cycles without touching another being. Elias felt that land harder than any accusation. "That's not typical," he said carefully. "No," Elthira agreed. "It is strategic." She met his eyes again, and this time there was no calculation, only honesty. "If peace is to be real," she continued, "someone must be willing to stand close enough to test whether the barrier is absolute." Elias understood then. This wasn't abstract curiosity. It was isolation, deliberate, enduring, costly. "And you chose me," he said. "I observed your work," Elthira replied. "You don't accept inherited assumptions. You ask why a system exists before agreeing it should." He gave a small, humorless smile. "That tendency has got me into trouble before." "Good," she said. "This will require it." The separation field pulsed softly. "What exactly are you proposing?" Elias asked. Elthira turned, gesturing toward a hovering projection that materialized between them. Molecular structures bloomed in slow rotation, complex chains, luminous nodes, unfamiliar symmetries. "My pheromonal compounds bind to human neuroreceptors," she said. "But binding is not inevitability. It is interaction." Elias leaned forward, instincts taking over. "You think the reaction can be blocked?" "Managed," she corrected. "Filtered, adapted." "That would require joint research," he said. "Full biochemical transparency. Medical collaboration at a level neither side has allowed." "Yes, and test subjects." Her eyes didn't leave his. "Yes." Elias let the silence sit this time. "You understand what you're asking," he said finally. "If this fails, politically, biologically, both our governments will bury it, possibly us with it." Elthira inclined her head. "I am aware." "And if it succeeds," he continued, "it destabilizes every argument built on separation." "Precisely." He studied her, really studied her now. Not as a queen, not as an alien. As a woman who had chosen distance for years because closeness killed. "When do you want to begin?" Elias asked. Elthira's breath caught just slightly. "Tomorrow," she said, "with medical observers, controlled conditions. No physical contact." "For now," he added. "For now," she echoed. The separation field dimmed as the session timer expired. As Elias turned to leave, her voice stopped him. "Elias." He looked back. "If this works," she said softly, "it will change more than policy." He nodded. "I know." As the doors opened and the hum of the station returned, one truth settled between them. Unspoken, undeniable. They weren't just negotiating peace anymore. They were standing at the edge of something far more dangerous, and neither of them intended to step away. The medical wing of the Celestine Accord had never been designed for intimacy. Sterile white surfaces curved into seamless walls. Transparent panels displayed constantly shifting vitals. The air was filtered to a degree normally reserved for quarantine zones or high containment research. Every system here existed to control risk, to quantify it, predict it, suppress it. Today, those systems were under scrutiny. Elias lay reclined on a diagnostic platform, a web of unobtrusive sensors mapped across his skin and spine. Thin filaments traced his temples, jawline, and collarbone, monitoring neural activity in real time. Above him, holographic readouts pulsed in steady rhythm, heart rate stable, respiration normal, cognitive stress within acceptable limits. Across the chamber, separated by a transparent adaptive field, Queen Elthira stood with her own medical team. She was not wearing her crown. That detail struck Elias harder than it should have. Instead, she wore a streamlined ceremonial tunic, Velarith in cut but simplified, functional, personal. Her pale hair was loose, cascading over her shoulders, and the faint bioluminescent markings along her temples glowed softly. Reacting to heightened emotional states, she was clearly not suppressing. "This is the final pretreatment," Dr. Hale said, her voice calm but tense. "Neuroreceptor dampening compounds will temporarily alter Elias' susceptibility to Velarith pheromonal binding. Effects are reversible, but duration is limited." "And the risks?" Elias asked. Dr. Hale met his eyes. "Unknown interactions, Potential neurological overload if concentration spiked too quickly. Worst-case scenario, systemic failure. Elthira didn't flinch. I assume the same applies to me, she said. Healer Vyerth inclined his head. Emotional suppression is not advised. It would destabilize pheromonal consistency. You must remain authentic. Elthira's gaze flicked to Elia's. Then authenticity is the variable, she said quietly. Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. Let's proceed, he said. The adaptive field between them thinned, not fully disengaging but loosening. Air circulation adjusted. Sensors recalibrated. The room seemed to inhale. For the first time, Elias caught the scent. Not overwhelming, not toxic. Subtle. Cool and sharp. Like ozone before a storm layered with something warmer beneath. Something alive. His breath caught instinctively, but the systems compensated instantly, modulating intake, stabilizing response. Neural activity elevated but stable, Dr. Hale reported. No receptor cascade. Elthira stepped forward. Just one step. The distance between them closed by less than a meter, but the effect was immediate. Elia's heart rate spiked, not in panic but awareness, every sense sharpened. The world narrowed to the space she occupied. Are you in pain? She asked. No, he said honestly, just aware. Her elongated ears angled forward, a Velarith sign of focused attention. You are closer to me now than any human has been in 6 cycles, she said, and you are still breathing. He smiled faintly, overachiever. Something unexpected happened then. She laughed. It was soft, brief, and entirely unguarded. The medical staff froze. Elias forgot to breathe for half a second, not because of pheromones, but because the sound did something inside him that no data point could explain. Emotional resonance detected, Healer Vyerth murmured. Pheromone levels rising, but within predicted tolerance. Elthira stilled. I should stop, she said. Do you want to? Elias asked. Her eyes searched his face, not as a sovereign evaluating risk, but as a woman weighing trust. No, she said. She took another step. Now they stood within arm's reach. The scent intensified, but the systems held. Elias felt warmth bloom beneath his skin, not illness connection. His body reacted but did not rebel. Elias, Elthira said softly, testing his name as if it mattered. If this fails, I will be the reason. He met her gaze. If this fails, it will be because neither of us backed away. Silence pressed in around them. Then slowly, deliberately, Elthira removed one glove and extended her hand. The room held its breath. This is not part of the protocol, Doctor. Hale warned. I know, Elthira said. It is part of trust. Elias didn't reach for her immediately. He thought of treaties, of casualties, of years of enforced distance written into law because fear was easier than effort. Then he placed his hand in hers. Contact, warmth, slightly different texture, a faint hum beneath her skin like energy held in check. The sensors screamed, then stabilized. No adverse reaction, Dr. Hale whispered. This is holding. Elthira's breath shuddered. I feel you, she said, voice unsteady. Not as a threat, not as an anomaly. Her grip tightened, not possessive but grounding. As someone present, she finished. Elias swallowed, good. Because I don't think this works if we pretend otherwise. They stood there, hands joined, while 2 civilizations held their breath unknowingly. After a long moment, Elthira gently withdrew. The distance felt wrong now. We end here today, she said, regaining composure. Before success becomes recklessness. Elias nodded, agreed. As the adaptive field strengthened again and the room exhaled, Elthira met his eyes one last time. This changes nothing officially, she said. He smiled. Of course. But as she turned to leave, Elias understood the truth. Everything had changed. Not because they touched, but because they hadn't died when they did. Sleep abandoned Elias entirely. His quarters were quiet, dimly lit by the slow rotation of the station beyond the viewport, stars drifting like indifferent witnesses. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the moment again and again. Not the fear, not the risk, but the absence of catastrophe. He had touched her and lived. The realization refused to settle into something ordinary. It pulsed through him, persistent and destabilizing. Entire doctrines, medical, political, cultural, had been built on the assumption that this was impossible. That proximity equaled death. That distance was the only mercy Velarith and humans could offer each other. Yet his hand still remembered the warmth of hers. The next morning brought escalation, not scientific, political. Elias was halfway through reviewing neural stability reports when his console chimed with priority override. Human Coalition insignia flared across the display. Observer Elias Venn, the message read. You are requested to report immediately to Oversight Council Chamber B. Attendance mandatory. He exhaled slowly, so it begins. The chamber was colder than the medical wing had been. Hard angles, hard faces. 5 counselors appeared as holographic projections, each one carefully neutral, which in Elias' experience meant deeply alarmed. You exceeded protocol, Counselor Bren began without preamble. Physical contact was not authorized. It was not prohibited either, Elias replied calmly. The protocol allowed adaptive discretion under controlled conditions. Controlled, another counselor snapped, does not mean intimate. But Elias met their collective gaze. If the goal is to determine whether biological incompatibility is absolute, then intimacy is not a deviation. It is the test. Silence followed. Then Bren leaned forward. You're emotionally compromised. But Elias didn't deny it. I'm invested, he said instead. There's a difference. A dangerous one. Only if we pretend emotion isn't already influencing policy, Elias countered. Fear has dictated our approach for decades. I'm proposing data. And the Queen, Bren asked, do you believe she's unaffected? Elias paused. No, he said honestly. I believe she's risking more than anyone. That unsettled them, more than defiance would have. You are authorized to continue, Bren said at last, voice tight. But understand this. If this becomes a relationship, the coalition will intervene. The word hung heavy. Elias inclined his head. Understood. But he left knowing exactly how thin that understanding was. Across the station, Queen Elthira faced her own reckoning. The Velarith Council Chamber was vast, its architecture organic and fluid, living crystal-grown rather than constructed. Elders watched her from elevated platforms, their elongated ears angled in rigid restraint. You touched the human, one of them said. Yes, Elthira replied evenly, without full council sanction. Yes, murmurs rippled. You risked pheromonal escalation. I calculated the risk. You risked symbolism. I embraced it. That silenced them. Elthira stepped forward, luminous markings brightening faintly. For 6 cycles, she continued, I have ruled from isolation. I have denied my nature to preserve safety. And still, you tell me peace remains fragile. She lifted her chin. I will not lead my people into a future built on permanent separation. If intimacy is dangerous, then we learn how to survive it. If closeness is lethal, then we engineer a way to make it sacred instead. An elder rose slowly, and the human. Her voice softened just slightly. He is not a weapon, not a threat. He is a variable willing to stand where others step back. The elder studied her. Your pheromones responded. Yes, Elthira admitted. Because I did not suppress myself. That path leads to attachment. Yes, she said again, it does. The chamber went still. You understand, the elder said carefully, that if this progresses beyond controlled testing, the bond formed will be irreversible by our customs. But Elthira's eyes did not waver. I understand. When the session ended, she did not return to her throne. She went instead to the observation gallery overlooking the station's inner ring. Moments later, Elias arrived. They hadn't planned it. They didn't need to. For a long moment they stood side by side, the faint hum of the station between them, distance carefully maintained, but now chosen, not enforced. You're thinking too loudly, Elias said softly. Althera's lips curved faintly. You're listening too closely. She turned to him. The councils are afraid, she said, not of death, of precedent. Elias nodded. Same on my side. Her gaze searched his face. And you? I'm afraid of wasting this, he said honestly. Of proving it's possible and then retreating because it's inconvenient. Something unguarded flickered in her eyes. The next phase, she said quietly, will require more than hands. Elias' breath slowed. How much more? Althera did not answer immediately. Instead, she lifted her hand, stopping just short of touching him, respecting the thin veil of protocol still between them. In Velorith tradition, she said, there is a gesture beyond contact, beyond proximity. He already knew the answer. A sharing of breath, he said. Yes. Silence stretched between them, heavy and alive. Not yet, Althera added. But soon. She lowered her hand. We should prepare, she said, carefully together. Elias nodded. As they parted, neither of them missed the truth settling quietly into place. They were no longer testing whether intimacy was survivable. They were deciding whether they were willing to want it, and that was far more dangerous. Preparation changed everything. Once the question shifted from can we survive proximity to are we willing to deepen it, the tone of the research altered in subtle but unmistakable ways. Protocols grew more cautious even as objectives became more intimate. Every variable was now scrutinized not just for safety, but for meaning. Elias noticed it first in the language. Medical briefings no longer referred to exposure windows, but to shared duration. Emotional states were logged alongside pheromone density. Even the environmental systems were recalibrated, not merely to neutralize Velorith biochemistry, but to respond to it, adjusting airflow and rhythm rather than opposition. The station itself was learning. The next session took place in a chamber unlike the previous ones. No medical platforms, no stark lighting. The walls were translucent, revealing slow-moving stars beyond, their light diffused into gentle gradients of blue and silver. Monitoring systems were present, but recessed, respectful, designed not to intrude. Althera entered first. She wore no crown, no symbols of sovereignty. Only a simple Velorith collar, polished crystal set close to her throat, its surface faintly luminous. Elias recognized it from archived cultural records. It was worn during vows. You don't have to do this, Elias said quietly when he joined her. Not today, not ever. Althera turned to face him, her expression composed but open. I know, she replied, which is why I am. The adaptive field between them was thinner now than it had ever been. Not gone, never gone, but subtle enough that Elias could almost forget it existed. Almost. We will not share breath today, Althera said, but we will prepare for it. Elias nodded. Tell me how. In Velorith understanding, she said, the gesture is not about the lips. That is merely the point of convergence. What matters is synchronization. She stepped closer. Breath, heart rate, emotional cadence. If those are misaligned, the body resists. Pheromones spike. Danger increases. So we align first, Elias said. Yes. They sat facing each other on the low platform at the chamber's center. No restraints. No barriers between their gazes. Close your eyes, Althera instructed. He did. Breathe when I breathe, she said softly. Not after, not before. He listened. At first it was awkward, his breath lagging behind hers, then rushing ahead. His heart thudded too fast. Awareness intruded. Thoughts scattered. Then slowly something shifted. Her breathing slowed. So did his. The chamber seemed to recede, leaving only the shared rhythm between them. Elias felt his body responding, not chemically but intuitively. His pulse matched hers. The faint tension in his shoulders eased. Good, Althera murmured. You are listening. Minutes passed, or seconds, time blurred. Now, she said, emotion. Elias frowned slightly. Emotion. You cannot suppress it, she continued. Suppression creates turbulence. You must allow what you feel without letting it overwhelm. That was harder. Images rose unbidden, her hand in his, her laugh. The vulnerability she'd shown before the council, the quiet strength beneath her composure. His heart rate spiked. The monitoring systems responded, but did not alarm. "Stay," Elthira said gently. "Do not retreat." He stayed. Her presence felt closer now, not physically but internally, as if awareness itself had shortened the distance. "I feel you," she said quietly. Elias opened his eyes, so did she. They were closer than planned, not touching, not yet, but close enough that he could see the fine luminescent threads beneath her skin, responding to emotional resonance rather than threat. Her ears angled forward, not alert, not defensive. Open. "Does this frighten you?" she asked. "Yes," he admitted. "Good," she said. "It means you are present." She lifted her hand, again stopping just short of contact. "May I?" she asked. The question mattered. "Yes," Elias said. Her fingertips brushed his wrist. The systems flared, then settled. Heat spread through him, not sharp, not dangerous. Grounding, Elthira exhaled shakily. "You are steady," she said. "This is rare." "So are you," he replied. For a moment neither spoke. Then Elthira withdrew her hand, not abruptly but with care. "We stop here," she said. "Success lies in restraint as much as courage." Elias nodded, though a part of him resisted the separation. "I know," he said. As the session ended and the adaptive field strengthened once more, Elias felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not longing, not fear, anticipation. Later that evening, alone in his quarters, he reviewed the data. Pheromone levels had risen, but smoothly. No spikes, no cascade. Emotional intensity had stabilized rather than destabilized the system. The impossible was becoming predictable. Across the station, Elthira stood alone before the stars, one hand resting lightly at her throat where the vow collar lay. For the first time since ascending the throne, she allowed herself to imagine a future that did not require distance as its foundation, one where closeness was not forbidden, only earned. And both of them understood the truth now, even if neither said it aloud. The final gesture was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of choice. And soon they would have to make it. The closer they moved toward the final gesture, the quieter the station became. Not physically. Traffic continued, systems hummed, diplomats argued in distant chambers, but around them, as if the Celestine Accord itself had learned to step carefully when Elias and Elthira shared space. Their meetings were no longer announced on public schedules. Their sessions were logged under layered clearance codes that meant acknowledged, but not discussed. Preparation had entered its final phase. This time, the chamber was sealed completely. No observers in the room. Medical teams monitored remotely, stripped down to essential telemetry only. No adaptive barriers shimmered between them. Only environmental filtration woven so subtly into the air that it felt like breathing normally. Elias stood still, letting his body acclimate. Across from him, Elthira was very still as well. "This is the last point at which we can stop without consequence," she said. Her voice was steady, but her ears betrayed her, angled slightly back, the Velarith signal of vulnerability held in check by discipline. "If we end here," she continued, "the data will still be revolutionary. Proximity without harm, emotional resonance without collapse. Our peoples will move closer than ever before. And if we continue," Elias said quietly, "then we create something that cannot be reduced to research." He nodded, "A bond." "Yes." Silence settled between them, heavier than any separation field had ever been. Elias broke it first. "Before we do this," he said, "there's something you should know." Elthira's gaze sharpened. "Tell me. If this fails, if something goes wrong, I don't want your people blaming you, or turning this into another reason to retreat from connection." Her expression softened. "You are worried about me," she said. "Yes." She stepped closer, slowly, deliberately, until the space between them felt charged again. "Then know this," she replied. "I am not doing this as a queen performing courage. I am doing this as a woman choosing closeness." Her eyes held his. "And I accept the consequences." Elias exhaled. a tension he hadn't realized he was holding finally loosening. Then I accept mine too. They sat facing each other, knees nearly touching. This time, Elthira said, we do not synchronize artificially, no guided breathing, no prompts. Just us, Elias said, yes. They closed their eyes. At first, Elias' mind raced, awareness of risk, of history, of everything that could go wrong. Then her presence anchored him again, not through touch but through attention, the quiet certainty of her focus. His breathing slowed naturally. So did hers. The data would later show something unprecedented, their physiological rhythms aligning without external mediation, heart rates converging, stress markers flattening, emotional intensity rising, but smoothly, coherently, like a system finding equilibrium rather than overload. I feel you, Elthira whispered. So do I, Elias replied. She opened her eyes, he did the same. They were closer now than ever before. Elias, she said softly, testing his name again as if it still mattered to say it aloud. In Velarith understanding, the final gesture does not begin with contact. What does it begin with? He asked with recognition. She lifted her hands not to touch him but to frame his face in the air, stopping just short. I see you, she said, not as human, not as emissary, but as the one who chose to stand where fear told others to step back. Elias swallowed. I see you, he answered, voice low, not as queen, not as danger, but as someone who carried isolation so others wouldn't have to. Something broke gently in her expression. That matters, she said. Yes, he replied, it does. The distance between them felt suddenly intentional, no longer enforced, no longer accidental. Chosen. Elthira leaned closer. Not enough. Not yet. The monitoring system chimed softly in his inner ear, a silent alert only he could hear. All systems stable, green across the board, ready. She stopped a breath away. This is the point, she said, barely above a whisper, where we either retreat or redefine what is possible. Elias didn't move. Then don't retreat, he said. Elthira's breath trembled. She smiled, not the controlled, sovereign smile the galaxy knew, but something small and real. Next session, she said, forcing herself to pull back by sheer will. We will complete it. The loss of proximity felt sharper than any fear had. As the chamber lights softened and the session ended, Elias understood something with absolute clarity. They were no longer preparing for danger. They were preparing for commitment. And that, far more than death, was what made his hands shake. The galaxy did not wait for them. The morning after their final preparation session, the Celestine Accord awoke to controlled panic disguised as procedure. Encrypted channels lit up across the station. Diplomatic aides moved faster. Security fields thickened. Nothing was said aloud, but everything shifted. Elias felt it the moment he stepped into the corridor. People were careful around him now. Not hostile, not deferential. Careful in the way one treats an unstable element, valuable, powerful, and potentially catastrophic. By the time he reached the briefing chamber, he already knew what was coming. They were losing patience. Your timeline is no longer acceptable, Counselor Bren said, her image sharp and unblinking in the holographic display. Political pressure is escalating on all fronts. Military blocs are interpreting your research as symbolic escalation rather than reconciliation. Elias folded his arms. We're days away from completing the final validation. You're days away from creating a precedent we can't control. Another counselor cut in. A personal bond between you and the Velarith Queen will be interpreted as favoritism, leverage, manipulation. Or leadership, Elias interrupted. Silence snapped tight. You don't get to redefine leadership on your own, Bren said coldly. No, Elias replied evenly. But history does, and it tends to reward the ones who step forward first. Bren's gaze hardened. This is your final directive. Complete the research without performing the Velarith trust gesture, or terminate the project entirely. The implication was clear. Prove proximity is survivable. Do not prove intimacy is possible. Elias disconnected without responding. Across the station, Elthira stood before the Velarith High Council and received the same ultimatum, dressed in different language, sharpened by ancient tradition. The bond you approach is irreversible, one elder warned. If you complete the gesture, your sovereignty will no longer be yours alone. Elthira inclined her head. It never truly was. Murmurs rippled. You risk binding the Dominion's future to a single human, another voice said. No, Elthira replied calmly. I risk demonstrating that our future does not require isolation to survive. The eldest among them rose slowly. You have carried restraint longer than any sovereign before you, he said, and now you ask us to accept vulnerability as strength. She met his gaze without flinching. I ask you to accept that strength without connection becomes stagnation. The chamber fell silent. At last the elder spoke. We will not stop you. Elthira's breath caught. But understand this, he continued. If you proceed, you do so as yourself, not shielded by council mandate. The bond will be yours to carry. She bowed deeply. I accept. They met later that cycle in the observation chamber overlooking the void. No protocols, no advisors, just the stars and each other. They want us to stop just short of the edge, Elias said. They want proof without consequence, Elthira replied. He nodded. Same on my side. Silence stretched between them, filled not with tension, but clarity. If we don't do this, Elias said quietly, they'll call the project a success and bury the rest. The idea that deeper connection is possible will be shelved as unnecessary risk. And if we do, Elthira said, we become the risk. Elias turned to her. Do you regret that? Her answer was immediate, no. She stepped closer, close enough that he felt her presence without touching, close enough that weeks ago would have been unthinkable. I will not return to isolation, she said, not after knowing what connection feels like. Elias swallowed. Neither will I. They stood there, suspended between consequence and choice. The next session, Elthira said softly, will not be monitored in real time. Elias stiffened. That increases the risk. Yes, she agreed, and removes performance. He searched her face. You're certain? She lifted her hand, hesitated, then let it fall back to her side. In Velarith culture, she said, a bond formed under observation is incomplete. True trust is offered without witnesses. Elias exhaled slowly. Then whatever happens, he said, happens because we chose it. Elthira's eyes softened. That is all I have ever wanted. As they parted, neither of them missed the quiet truth settling into place. They had reached the final threshold. Not of biology, not of politics, but of identity. The next time they met, they would no longer be testing whether intimacy was possible. They would be choosing whether to become something neither of their civilizations was ready for. Together, and once chosen, there would be no stepping back. The chamber had no name. It wasn't listed on any public map of the Celestine Accord, nor marked by diplomatic designation or security code. It existed because Elias had once designed a redundant environmental node that no one thought would ever be used, and because Elthira had quietly requested that very node be repurposed. No observers, no live monitoring, only silent failsafes running in the background, ready to intervene after a catastrophe, not before. If something went wrong, history would learn about it later. They arrived separately, as agreed. Elias entered first, letting the door seal behind him. The air felt ordinary, which under the circumstances was extraordinary. His body carried the familiar calm of preparation, the medication active, systems aligned, but beneath it was something new. Acceptance. When Elthira entered, he felt it immediately. Not danger, presence. She wore no crown, no collar, no symbol of office or vow, only herself. Her luminous markings were visible now, unmasked and honest, responding freely to emotion she was no longer trying to control. This is the last time, she said softly, that we stand on opposite sides of anything. Elias nodded. Then let's not waste it. They moved closer. Not abruptly, not cautiously, but with the steady confidence of people who had already crossed every invisible line except the final one. "This will bind us," Elthira said. "In my culture, the gesture does not fade. It becomes part of who we are." "And in mine," Elias replied, "commitment isn't sacred unless it's chosen freely." She smiled at that small, real, unguarded. "Then choose me," she said. He didn't hesitate. "I do." They stood close enough now that breath stirred the space between them. Elias felt the faint warmth of her body, the subtle shift in the air as her pheromonal presence deepened, not spiking, not restrained, simply present. Nothing in him recoiled. Nothing in him resisted. "I see you," Elthira said, voice steady despite the emotion trembling beneath it. Not as human, not as risk, but as the one who stood where fear demanded distance. "I see you," Elias answered, not as queen, not as danger, but as someone who chose connection when isolation would have been safer. They synchronized without effort now, breath aligning, heartbeat slowing. The chamber itself seemed to quiet as if reality were listening. Elthira lifted her hands, this time not stopping short. Her palms rested against his chest. Elias placed his hands at her waist, aware of every difference and how little it mattered. "This is the point of no return," she whispered. "Then don't return," he replied. She leaned in. The gesture, what humans would call a kiss, was nothing like the clinical risk assessments had described. It wasn't heat or overwhelm, it was clarity. A sharing of breath that felt intentional rather than dangerous. A moment of absolute presence, where biology, culture, history, and fear all fell silent under something simpler and stronger. Connection. Elias felt it in his chest, not pain, not dizziness, but a steady grounding warmth. His body did not rebel. His mind did not fracture. He was alive. Elthira shuddered softly, her markings flaring briefly, then stabilizing, glowing with resonance rather than alarm. They stayed like that longer than either of them intended. When they finally separated, her eyes were wet, ears trembling openly now, unashamed. "It worked," she breathed. "Yes," Elias said. "It did." They rested their foreheads together, sharing space without fear, without filters, without the need to step back. Outside that chamber, the galaxy remained divided. Councils argued. Fleets postured. History waited impatiently to decide whether they were heroes or liabilities. Inside, something quieter had already been decided. They had crossed the final barrier, not because they were reckless, but because they were willing. Elthira's fingers tightened slightly in his. "Whatever comes next," she said, "they won't be able to pretend this is possible anymore." Elias smiled, a soft, steady thing.